The brass bell above the trading post door jangled violently as Hadley Daniels stumbled inside, her tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the bright May morning in Challis, Idaho, 1879. Her trembling hands clutched the worn shawl wrapped protectively around her slightly swollen middle, evidence of the 4-month secret she'd managed to keep hidden until yesterday, when her father had discovered the truth that would forever change her life. "Please," she begged the shopkeeper, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there work here? Anything at all?" Albert Finney, the aging proprietor, looked up from his ledger, his weathered face softening momentarily at the sight of the distraught young woman. Then his eyes caught the subtle curve of her abdomen and his expression hardened. "I've heard about you, Miss Daniels. Your pa's been telling everyone in town what a disgrace you've brought upon your family." He shook his head. "I can't afford any scandals in my establishment. Good day." Hadley backed away, a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill. At 20 years old, she had never imagined finding herself in such desperate straits. The father of her child, a smooth-talking salesman passing through town, had disappeared months ago, leaving her with nothing but false promises and a growing child in her womb. Her family's reaction had been swift and merciless. Her father, a deacon at the local church, had declared her dead to him. Her mother had wept, but ultimately stood by her husband's decision. By morning, Hadley had been informed she was to be sold off to whoever would take her a marriage arranged by force to save what little remained of the family's reputation. Outside the trading post, she leaned against the rough wooden wall, unsure where to turn next. Challis was a small town nestled in the mountains of the Idaho Territory, and news traveled fast. Already, she could feel the stares of passers-by, could hear their whispered judgments. "I'll find a way," she murmured to her unborn child, one hand protectively cradling her belly. "Somehow." Down the dusty main street, Luke Patterson guided his horse toward the livery stable. At 32, he had finally settled in Challis after years of drifting across the Western Territories. The cattle ranch he'd purchased 3 months prior sat 10 miles outside of town, far enough for privacy, close enough for convenience. As a former ranch hand who'd saved every penny for years, the modest spread represented everything he'd worked for. "Morning, Mr. Patterson," called the livery owner as Luke dismounted. "Morning, Jim. How are things?" "Busy with gossip, if nothing else," Jim replied, taking the reins. "Deacon Daniels' daughter got herself in the family way. Quite the scandal." Luke nodded noncommittally. The affairs of townsfolk rarely concerned him, and he had no interest in joining the chorus of judgment that inevitably followed such news. "Need any supplies while you're in town?" Jim asked. "Just picking up some seed and tools. Maybe have a meal at Mrs. Wilson's cafe before heading back." As Luke walked down the boardwalk toward the general store, he couldn't help noticing the young woman huddled against the wall of the trading post. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and something about her desperate solitude tugged at him. He was about to continue on his way when he caught the unmistakable words being exchanged by 2 women walking past. "That's her, the Daniels girl, carrying a bastard and shameless enough to show her face in town. I heard her pa's arranged for her to marry old Wilbur Crane from over in Salmon. He's willing to take her despite her condition." "Wilbur Crane? But he's nearly 60 and buried 3 wives already." Luke frowned. Wilbur Crane's reputation extended beyond the boundaries of Challis. The man was known to be cruel to his livestock and crueler still to his wives. The thought of this young woman being handed over to such a fate stirred something within him. Before he could reconsider, Luke found himself approaching her. "Miss, are you all right?" Hadley looked up, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her. "You don't look fine," He kept his distance, mindful of propriety despite his concern. "Is there someone I can fetch for you?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No, there's no one left who'd come if called." The raw pain in her voice struck him deeply. Luke had known abandonment in his own life, orphaned at 12, and forced to make his own way in the world. He recognized the look of someone who had been cast aside. "I'm Luke Patterson," he said, removing his hat. "I've got a ranch outside town." "If you're in need of work, you don't understand," she cut in, her voice low. "I'm Hadley Daniels. Surely you've heard by now what kind of woman I am." Luke's gaze briefly dropped to her midsection before returning to her face. "I've heard talk, but I make my own judgments, Miss Daniels." Before she could respond, a booming voice interrupted them. "Get away from my daughter, Patterson." Deacon Ephraim Daniels strode toward them, his face contorted with fury. Behind him walked a stooped, gray-haired man with cold eyes that raked over Hadley's figure possessively. "Your daughter seems distressed," Luke said evenly, not backing away. "My daughter is no concern of yours," Daniels spat. "Come, Hadley. Mr. Crane has agreed to the arrangement. We're finalizing the details now." Hadley's face drained of color as she looked at the elderly man. "Father, please," she whispered. "I'll go anywhere, do anything, but not this." "You forfeited your right to choices," her father said coldly. "You'll do as I say and be grateful Mr. Crane is willing to salvage what's left of your reputation." Luke watched the interaction with growing anger. The young woman was being treated like livestock, sold to the highest bidder or perhaps the only bidder willing to take on a pregnant, unmarried woman. "What's the arrangement exactly?" Luke found himself asking. Daniels glared at him. "That's none of your affair." $200, Crane said, his thin lips curling into what might have been a smile. "A fair price for damaged goods, I think." Hadley flinched at the words, and something in Luke snapped. "That innocent child needs real love," he said firmly. "Not to be raised in a home where its mother is considered damaged goods." "The child will be raised properly, under God's law," Daniels insisted. "Under his belt is more likely," Luke muttered, having heard the rumors about Crane's treatment of his previous wives. "How dare you?" Crane sputtered. Luke turned to Hadley. "Miss Daniels, I won't pretend to know what's best for you, but if you're being forced into this against your will, perhaps there's another solution." "There isn't," Daniels said flatly. $300, Luke said suddenly, surprising even himself. "I'll pay $300 for your daughter's hand." A stunned silence fell over the group. Hadley stared at Luke, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You, what?" Daniels finally managed. "You heard me. $300 and I'll marry her today. She'll have a home, security, and her child will be raised with kindness." Luke met Hadley's gaze. "If she's willing." Crane's face reddened. "This is preposterous. We had an agreement." Luke ignored him, keeping his eyes fixed on Hadley. "It would be a marriage in name only until you decide otherwise," he said softly. "You'd have your own room, your own space. I'm offering safety, nothing more." Hadley studied him, searching for deceit or hidden motives in his face. All she saw was sincerity in his clear blue eyes. A man offering shelter when the entire world had turned its back on her. "Why?" she whispered. Luke hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to have nowhere to turn," he said finally. "And because that child deserves a chance." Deacon Daniels was calculating rapidly, the increased sum clearly tempting him. "Patterson, you have a reputation as a loner. Why this sudden interest in marriage and to a fallen woman, no less?" "My reasons are my own," Luke replied firmly. "But my offer stands provided Miss Daniels agrees." All eyes turned to Hadley, who felt the weight of the moment bearing down upon her. Marry a virtual stranger or be handed over to a man known for cruelty. Neither option was what she had dreamed of, but one offered at least a glimmer of hope. "I accept Mr. Patterson's offer," she said quietly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "If he's willing to provide for my child, I accept." Crane spat on the ground. "You'll regret this, Patterson. That woman's trouble." Luke ignored him, focusing instead on Deacon Daniels. "Do we have an agreement?" The older man nodded stiffly. "Come by the house in an hour with the money. I'll have her things packed and ready." As her father and Crane stormed off, Hadley remained motionless, unable to process the sudden turn her life had taken. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Luke, her voice barely audible. He offered a slight smile. "I can't say I plan to get married today when I rode into town, but I stand by my word. You'll be safe with me, Miss Daniels. Both of you will." For the first time that day, Hadley felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not quite yet, but perhaps the faintest possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. True to his word, Luke arrived at the Daniels household an hour later, the promised sum secured in a leather pouch. The transaction was coldly efficient money exchanged for a daughter, a marriage certificate signed by the reluctant minister who had been summoned, and Hadley's meager possessions loaded into Luke's wagon. Her mother cried silently in the corner, not daring to defy her husband by offering a proper goodbye. Her younger sisters watched with wide, frightened eyes as Hadley was ushered out of the only home she had ever known. Her father refused to look at her at all. "God have mercy on your soul," were Deacon Daniels' final words as the wagon pulled away, carrying his daughter toward an uncertain future. The 10-mile journey to Luke's ranch passed mostly in silence. Hadley sat rigid beside him, her hands clutched in her lap, her mind reeling with the day's events. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Luke finally said as they crested a hill, "but I promise you won't be mistreated." "Why did you do it?" Hadley asked again. "The truth, please." Luke was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses down the gentle slope toward the valley where his ranch lay. "My mother found herself in a similar situation when she was young," he finally said. "The man who took her in, he wasn't kind. She died when I was 12, worn down by years of his charity, when I heard what they were planning for you." He shook his head. "I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." Hadley studied his profile, the strong jawline, the determined set of his mouth, the kindness in his eyes that contrasted with his weathered appearance. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "You don't need to repay anything. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." As they rounded the final bend in the road, Hadley caught her first glimpse of the Patterson ranch. It was modest but well-kept, a sturdy 2-story farmhouse, a large barn, a corral with several horses, and fields stretching toward the distant mountains. It wasn't grand, but it had a peaceful quality that immediately appealed to her. "It's not much," Luke said, misinterpreting her silence. "But the roof doesn't leak, and there's plenty of food." "It's beautiful," Hadley replied honestly. After the cold rejection she'd faced in town, the simple homestead looked like paradise. Luke helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The interior of the house was plain but clean, with solid furniture and a few touches that suggested Luke had made an effort to create a proper home. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," he said, carrying her trunk up the narrow staircase. "Mine's at the end of the hall. You'll have your privacy." The bedroom was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the mountains. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the dresser, and the bed was made up with clean linens. "Did you know I was coming?" Hadley asked, confused by the prepared state of the room. Luke looked slightly embarrassed. "No, I've had the room ready since I moved in. Force of habit from growing up with nothing, I suppose, always prepared for something. He set down her trunk. I'll let you settle in. There's a washroom at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up. I'll start dinner. After he left, Hadley sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to process everything that had happened. In the span of 24 hours, she had gone from a beloved daughter to a disgrace, sold by her own father to the highest bidder. Yet somehow, she had ended up here, in this peaceful home with a man who seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling a flutter of movement. "We're safe," she whispered to her child. "For now, at least, we're safe." Downstairs, Luke moved about the kitchen, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of a venison steak. His hands worked automatically while his mind raced. What had he done? Married a woman he barely knew, committed himself to raising another man's child. His carefully ordered life had been upended in the space of an afternoon, yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The thought of Hadley in Wilbur Crane's clutches made his stomach turn. Whatever complications his impulsive decision might bring, at least he had prevented that fate. When Hadley came downstairs, her face freshly washed and her hair neatly braided, Luke was struck by her quiet beauty. Without the veil of tears and fear, he could see the strength in her delicate features. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted as he set plates on the table, "but it's hot and there's plenty of it." "It looks wonderful," she said, taking a seat. "I enjoy cooking." "Perhaps I could take over that duty to earn my keep." "You don't need to earn your keep," Luke said firmly. "This is your home now, but if cooking would make you happy, I certainly wouldn't object." They ate in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. "Will people talk?" Hadley finally asked. "About you taking in the disgraced Daniels girl," Luke shrugged. "People always talk. It doesn't much concern me what they say. It might affect your business, your standing in the community. I keep to myself mostly. The cattle don't care about gossip, and neither do I." He paused. "But if it bothers you, we can say the child is mine, that we were secretly married before I came to Challies." Hadley looked startled. "You would claim another man's child as your own, if it would make things easier for you and the baby, yes." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Luke considered his answer carefully. "Because kindness shouldn't be rare enough to question. Because you deserve better than what fate handed you. And because that child deserves to enter the world surrounded by love, not shame." A tear slipped down Hadley's cheek. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just know that you're safe here and you can stay as long as you wish. If someday you want to leave, make a different life, I won't stand in your way." After dinner, Luke showed Hadley around the ranch, the vegetable garden that needed tending, the chicken coop, the small orchard of apple trees just beginning to blossom. By the time they returned to the house, darkness had fallen, and an awkward moment ensued as they realized it was time for bed. "I'll say good night," Luke said, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Hadley replied softly, "for everything." That night, lying in her new bed, Hadley stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. The day's events replayed in her mind: her father's fury, Crane's cold eyes, and the unexpected salvation offered by a stranger with kind eyes. Luke Patterson was a mystery to her, but one she was suddenly eager to solve. "Perhaps things will be all right after all," she whispered to her unborn child as she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. In the days that followed, Hadley and Luke established a cautious routine. She took over the cooking and household tasks, finding comfort in the familiar activities. Luke worked from sunrise to sunset, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and preparing for the summer grazing season. They shared meals and occasional conversation, but both maintained a careful distance, two strangers navigating the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. A week after her arrival, Hadley was hanging laundry in the yard when she spotted a wagon approaching. Her heart sank as she recognized Mrs. Wilson, the owner of the cafe in town, accompanied by several other women. Clearly, news of her situation had sparked curiosity. "Should I go inside?" she asked Luke, who was repairing a saddle nearby. He studied the approaching wagon. "Only if you want to. This is your home now. You have nothing to hide." Bolstered by his confidence, Hadley continued with her task, though her hands trembled slightly as the wagon came to a stop. "Good afternoon, Mr. Patterson," Mrs. Wilson called, her gaze fixed curiously on Hadley. "We thought we'd come meet your new bride. News travels fast in Challies." "So it does," Luke replied evenly. "Ladies, this is my wife, Hadley. Hadley, these are some of the women from town." The word wife sent an unexpected flutter through Hadley's chest. It was technically true, but hearing Luke say it aloud made the arrangement suddenly seem more real. "We've brought some things," said Mrs. Harper, a plump woman with kind eyes. "Wedding gifts of sorts." To Hadley's surprise, the women began unloading baskets of preserves, a hand-stitched quilt, seeds for the garden, and other practical items. Their curiosity was evident, but there was no malice in their expressions. "That's very kind," she managed, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. "We take care of our own in Challies," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "Your father's position on the matter isn't shared by everyone." As the women chatted and helped Hadley finish hanging the laundry, she caught Luke watching from a distance, a hint of a smile on his face. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Hadley felt a glimmer of hope that she might find acceptance again. After the visitors departed, promising to return soon, Hadley turned to Luke. "Thank you for not sending them away. You need friends, people you can turn to besides me," he said simply. "And it seems not everyone shares your father's judgment." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Hadley found herself studying Luke's profile. The strength in his jawline, the gentleness in his eyes that contradicted his rough exterior. "Tell me about yourself," she said suddenly. "I realize I know almost nothing about the man I've married." Luke leaned back in his chair, considering her request. "Not much to tell. My father died when I was young. My mother remarried a man who resented having another man's son underfoot. When she died, I left. Worked ranches across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, saved every penny, bought this place 3 months ago. No family, no one at all," he shook his head. "Just me. Until now," he glanced at her. "What about you, before all this?" Hadley sighed. "I was the perfect deacon's daughter, helped at church, taught Sunday school, never questioned my father's authority." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "Then James Sullivan came to town selling sewing machines. He was handsome and charming and told me I was beautiful. No one had ever said that to me before." "You are beautiful," Luke said quietly. Hadley blushed, continuing her story. "He promised to return in a month and marry me. I believed him, foolishly. By the time I realized he wasn't coming back, it was too late." "That doesn't make you foolish," Luke said firmly. "It makes him dishonorable. My father didn't see it that way. In his eyes, I sinned willfully and deserved whatever punishment God saw fit to deliver." "Then your father's understanding of God is different from mine," Luke replied. "The God I believe in forgives. He doesn't sell his children to the highest bidder." The conviction in his voice moved something deep within Hadley. "You're a good man, Luke Patterson." "I'm beginning to think I got the better end of our arrangement," he chuckled softly. "I think we both did." As May turned to June, the ranch burst into summer life. The vegetable garden Hadley tended began yielding its first harvest. The cattle grew fat on the lush mountain pastures. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wall of caution between Hadley and Luke began to crumble. They worked together during the days, Luke teaching Hadley about ranch life, Hadley bringing warmth and comfort to what had been a lonely bachelor's existence. In the evenings, they sat on the porch talking, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. As Hadley's pregnancy advanced, Luke insisted she rest more, taking on additional household tasks himself. His concern for her welfare touched her deeply, especially when contrasted with her family's rejection. One evening in early July, as they sat at the dinner table, Hadley gasped suddenly, her hand flying to her belly. "What is it?" Luke asked, alarm evident in his voice. "Should I fetch the doctor?" Hadley shook her head, a smile spreading across her face. "No, it's nothing wrong. The baby just kicked, strongly for the first time." She hesitated, then held out her hand. "Would you like to feel?" Luke looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" "Yes, this child will be yours in every way that matters." "You should meet them." Tentatively, Luke placed his calloused hand on the swell of her abdomen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a definite thump against his palm. His eyes widened in wonder. "That's amazing," he whispered. Something shifted between them in that moment. A connection formed that transcended their unusual circumstances. As Luke's hand lingered, their eyes met, and Hadley felt her heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "I should check on the horses," Luke said suddenly, pulling his hand away and rising from the table. Left alone, Hadley pressed her own hand to the spot where his had been, confused by the emotion stirring within her. She had married Luke out of necessity, grateful for his kindness, but expecting nothing more. When had gratitude begun transforming into something deeper? Outside in the barn, Luke busied himself with unnecessary tasks, trying to calm his racing heart. He had promised Hadley safety, security, and respect, not romantic entanglements. Yet the sight of her smile, the feeling of new life beneath his hand, had awakened desires he'd thought long buried. "She deserves better than a rough rancher," he muttered to his horse, who nickered softly in response. Someone educated, refined, not someone who had to teach himself to read by candlelight. Yet as the days passed, the connection between them continued to deepen. Hadley found herself watching for Luke's return whenever he rode out to check the cattle. Luke found himself lingering over meals, inventing reasons to remain in the house rather than return to his outdoor tasks. In mid-July, Hadley insisted on accompanying Luke into town for supplies, despite his concerns about her facing the townspeople. "I can't hide forever," she said firmly. "And I won't have you facing any gossip alone." The trip proved less difficult than anticipated. While there were curious glances and whispered conversations, the open hostility Hadley had feared did not materialize. Mrs. Wilson greeted them warmly at the cafe, insisting they stay for pie. Several of the women who had visited the ranch stopped to inquire about Hadley's health. As they were loading their purchases into the wagon, however, Hadley spotted her father emerging from the church. For a moment, their eyes met across the dusty street. Deacon Daniels' expression hardened, and he deliberately turned away, crossing to the opposite boardwalk to avoid passing near them. The rejection stung, despite everything. Luke, noticing her distress, placed a protective hand on her back. "His loss," he said quietly, "not yours." The simple gesture of support meant everything to Hadley. When Luke helped her into the wagon, their hands touched briefly, and the now familiar flutter returned to her chest. This time, she didn't try to dismiss it. That night, a summer thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Hadley lay awake, listening to the rain drum against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. A particularly loud crack made her jump, and moments later a knock came at her door. "Hadley, are you all right?" Luke's concerned voice called. "Yes, just startled," she replied, sitting up in bed. Luke opened the door a crack, careful to remain in the hallway. "The storm's directly overhead. Wanted to make sure you weren't frightened." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his face, his hair tousled from sleep, concern evident in his eyes. "I've always loved storms," Hadley admitted. "The power of them, the reminder that there are forces greater than ourselves." Luke smiled. "I feel the same way, though they make the cattle nervous." Another flash of lightning, another rumble of thunder. Neither made a move to end the conversation. "Would you like to come in?" Hadley asked softly. "Just to talk," she added quickly. "The storm's making me restless." After a moment's hesitation, Luke entered, careful to leave the door partially open. He sat in the small chair by the writing desk, keeping a respectful distance from the bed. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "With the baby, I mean." "Growing stronger every day," Hadley replied, unconsciously resting a hand on her rounded belly. "Dr. Miller says everything looks healthy. The baby should arrive in late October. Just in time for winter," Luke noted. "We'll need to stock extra provisions, ensure we can reach town if necessary." The way he said, "We so natural, so inclusive," warmed Hadley's heart. "You've thought about it a lot." "Of course. This will be my child too, in every way that matters." He paused. "If you still want that." "I know our arrangement was made quickly under duress." "I want it," Hadley said without hesitation. "You've shown more care for this child already than its natural father ever did." She studied his face in the dim light. "Luke, may I ask you something personal?" He nodded. "Why have you never married before now? A kind man with land of his own. Surely there have been opportunities." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "There was someone once in Colorado. Sarah was her name. We were young, had plans to marry. She died of fever before we could." "I'm sorry," Hadley said softly. "It was a long time ago. After that, I kept to myself mostly, focused on work, on saving enough to have something of my own." "And now you have a wife you never wanted and a child on the way," Hadley said, a note of sadness creeping into her voice. "That's not true," Luke replied firmly. "I may not have planned for this life, but that doesn't mean I don't want it." The sincerity in his voice sent a shiver through Hadley that had nothing to do with the storm. Outside, the thunder was moving away, the rain gentling to a steady patter. "I should let you rest," Luke said, rising from the chair. "Luke," Hadley said impulsively, "thank you, not just for taking us in, but for seeing me when everyone else only saw my shame." He paused at the doorway. "There's no shame in you, Hadley Patterson, only strength." The use of his surname for her sent another flutter through Hadley's heart. As Luke closed the door behind him, she lay back against her pillows, pondering the strange path that had led her to this moment and the unexpected feelings growing for the man who had rescued her. As summer progressed, Hadley's pregnancy became more pronounced. Luke insisted on hiring a local boy, Thomas Jenkins, to help with the heavier ranch work, freeing Luke to stay closer to the house. His protectiveness touched Hadley deeply, especially as the summer heat made her increasingly uncomfortable. One evening in early August, as the worst of the day's heat began to fade, Luke found Hadley on the porch, attempting to fan herself with a folded newspaper. "I have an idea," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Something that might help with the heat." He led her down a narrow path behind the house, through a small grove of cottonwood trees, to a spot where a creek widened into a natural pool. Willows draped their branches over the water, creating a private, shaded sanctuary. "I come here to cool off after working," Luke explained. "The water's clean and not too deep. I thought you might find it refreshing." The crystal-clear water looked heavenly to Hadley, who had been struggling with the summer temperatures. "It's beautiful, but I don't have anything to swim in." "You could wade in just as you are," Luke suggested. "The dress will dry quickly in this heat." "I'll wait back at the house to give you privacy." As he turned to leave, Hadley impulsively caught his hand. "Stay, please. I'd feel safer with you nearby." Luke hesitated, then nodded, settling himself beneath a willow tree with his back to the pool. "I'll be right here. Take as long as you like." Hadley slipped off her shoes and stockings, then gathered her skirts above her knees before stepping into the water. The cool relief was immediate and wonderful. She waded deeper until the water lapped around her thighs and then carefully sat on a smooth rock, allowing the water to envelop her swollen body. "This is heaven," she sighed, closing her eyes. Luke smiled, keeping his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I thought you'd like it." They remained that way for some time, Hadley soaking in the cool water, Luke sitting with his back to her, talking quietly about his plans for the ranch, the cattle he hoped to purchase, the improvements he wanted to make to the house before winter. "I'm thinking of adding another bedroom," he said. "For the baby, and perhaps enlarging the kitchen. Would you like that?" The consideration in his question moved Hadley deeply. "Yes, very much. But you needn't go to such trouble." "It's no trouble. This is your home now, both of you," he paused. "I want you to be happy here." "I am happy," Hadley replied softly. "Happier than I ever expected to be again." Something in her voice made Luke turn slightly, catching a glimpse of her in the dappled sunlight filtering through the willows. Water droplets glistened on her skin, and her hair had come partially loose from its pins, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. The sight made his breath catch. Quickly, he turned away again. "I should check on those fence posts I was setting," he said, rising abruptly. "Take your time. The path back to the house is clear." Before Hadley could respond, he was gone, leaving her confused by his sudden departure. Had she said something wrong? Or was it something else entirely, the same awareness that had been growing between them, the connection that transcended their practical arrangement? Later that evening, as they sat at the dinner table, a palpable tension hung in the air. Luke seemed unusually quiet, responding to Hadley's attempts at conversation with short answers. Finally, she set down her fork. "Have I done something to upset you?" Luke looked startled. "No, of course not. Why would you think that? You've barely spoken 3 words since we returned from the creek." She studied his face. "If you're regretting our arrangement, I'm not," he interrupted firmly. "Not for a moment." "Then what is it?" Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I made you a promise when we married. That it would be a marriage in name only, that you'd have your space and freedom. I intend to keep that promise." Understanding dawned on Hadley. "You're afraid your feelings might compromise that promise." The directness of her observation caught him off guard. Yes, I suppose that's it." Hadley reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Luke, when I agreed to marry you, I was desperate and afraid. I saw you as a safe harbor in a storm, nothing more. But these past months—" She took a deep breath. "These past months have shown me what kind of man you truly are. Kind, honorable, gentle." "Hadley, let me finish. The promises you made were necessary then, but people change, circumstances change." Her hand tightened on his. "My feelings for you have changed." Luke's eyes searched hers, hope and caution warring in his expression. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Luke Patterson. Not out of gratitude or necessity, but because of who you are. Because of how you've treated me, not as damaged goods, but as someone worthy of respect, of love." For a moment, Luke sat motionless, as if unable to believe what he was hearing. Then slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. "I've been fighting my feelings for you," he admitted quietly. "Telling myself it was wrong to want more, that you deserved better than a rough rancher who can barely write his own name." "There is nothing better," Hadley said firmly. "No one better." Luke stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. With his free hand, he cupped her cheek, his touch feather-light. "I love you, Hadley Patterson. I think I have since the moment I saw you standing alone against that wall in town." The tenderness in his eyes brought tears to Hadley's. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Luke lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. When he began to draw back, Hadley rose on tiptoe, pressing her lips more firmly to his. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken longing pouring into a single perfect moment of connection. When they finally parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this? About us?" "More sure than I've ever been about anything," Hadley replied, her heart fuller than she had thought possible. That night, for the first time, Luke walked Hadley to her bedroom door and kissed her again, not as a reluctant protector, but as a husband truly in love with his wife. "Good night, Mrs. Patterson," he whispered. Hadley smiled, savoring the sound of the name that now felt truly hers. "Good night, my love." As August gave way to September, Luke and Hadley settled into a new rhythm, one of tender glances, stolen kisses, and deepening intimacy. The practical arrangement that had brought them together blossomed into genuine love, surprising them both with its intensity. Luke proved to be as gentle a lover as he was a protector, mindful of Hadley's pregnancy and concerned always for her comfort. For Hadley, experiencing physical love born of genuine affection rather than false promises was a revelation. Their happiness was so complete that when the first autumn storm brought an unexpected visitor to their door, it caught them entirely off guard. Luke opened the door to find James Sullivan, the father of Hadley's child, standing on their porch, rain dripping from his expensive coat. "I'm looking for Hadley Daniels," he said, not recognizing Luke. "I'm told she lives here now." Luke's expression hardened. "Her name is Hadley Patterson." "She's my wife." Sullivan looked surprised. "Wife? Well, that was quick work." He peered past Luke into the house. "I'd like to speak with her if you don't mind." "I do mind," Luke said coldly. "You abandoned her when she needed you most. You have no right to speak to her now." "That's for her to decide, isn't it?" Sullivan flashed the charming smile that had won Hadley's heart months earlier. "I've come to make things right." Before Luke could respond, Hadley appeared behind him, drawn by the sound of voices. She froze at the sight of Sullivan, her hand instinctively moving to protect her prominent belly. "James," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Hadley." Sullivan's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her pregnancy, now impossible to hide. "You're looking well. May I come in?" "It's rather wet out here." Luke glanced at Hadley, leaving the decision to her. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "Let him in. I want to hear what he has to say." Reluctantly, Luke stepped aside, allowing Sullivan to enter. The three of them moved to the sitting room, an uncomfortable tableau, Hadley and Luke seated together on the sofa, Sullivan in the armchair opposite. "I returned to Challies expecting to find you at your parents' home," Sullivan began. "Imagine my surprise when the deacon informed me you'd been sold off to some rancher." He glanced around the modest room. "Though I must say, you seem to have landed on your feet." "What do you want, James?" Hadley asked, her voice stronger than Luke had expected. Sullivan leaned forward. "I've come to do right by you, of course. When I left, I had business to attend to back east. Family matters very complicated, but I always intended to return." "After 5 months," Luke interjected skeptically. Sullivan ignored him, focusing on Hadley. "The child is mine, I assume." I'm prepared to acknowledge it. In fact, I've purchased a house in Boise. We could be very comfortable there. We, Hadley repeated. You and the child, of course. I understand your marriage was one of convenience. I'm sure arrangements can be made to dissolve it. Luke tensed beside Hadley, but remained silent, allowing her to handle the situation as she saw fit. His trust in her judgment spoke volumes. Hadley studied Sullivan's handsome face, the face that had once made her heart race, that had whispered promises in the moonlight. Now she felt nothing but a distant sadness for the naive girl she had once been. "You're too late, James," she said simply. "Even if you had come back immediately, you're too late. You never loved me. You saw a sheltered girl who was easy to manipulate." "That's not fair," Sullivan protested. "I did care for you. I still do." "No, you don't. You care about your reputation, about doing what looks right." Hadley's hand found Luke's, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I'm married now, truly married to a man who loves me and this child unconditionally." Sullivan's gaze shifted between them, finally registering the genuine connection. "I see," he said stiffly. "Well, I still have responsibilities to the child. I'm prepared to provide financial support." "The child will want for nothing," Luke said firmly. "I can provide for my family." "Your family," Sullivan scoffed. "That's my child she's carrying." "No," Hadley said quietly. "It's our child. Luke's and mine. He was there when you weren't. He'll be there for every moment that matters, the birth, the first steps, the first words. Being a father is more than blood, James. It's being present. It's loving without conditions." Sullivan stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I have rights." "You forfeited those rights when you abandoned them," Luke replied, rising to stand protectively beside Hadley. "The law may not see it that way, but we do. This child is ours. If you want to contest that, you're welcome to try. But I warn you, Challies is a small town with a long memory. Your reputation won't survive the truth becoming public." For a long moment, Sullivan stood silent, calculation evident in his eyes. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a calling card. "My address in Boise," he said, placing it on the table. "Should you change your mind, or should the child ever wish to know its true father?" "Its true father is standing right here," Hadley said, her voice unwavering as she looked up at Luke. Without another word, Sullivan retrieved his hat and walked to the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at them. "You've changed, Hadley. You were sweeter before." "I've grown stronger," she corrected him. "There's a difference." After the door closed behind Sullivan, Luke turned to Hadley, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" To his surprise, she smiled. "I'm perfectly all right, better than all right." She placed a hand on her belly as the baby kicked vigorously. "It seems our child agrees." Luke knelt beside her, placing his hand next to hers. "You're remarkable, Hadley Patterson. I don't know many who could face down their past with such grace." "It was easy," she replied, cupping his cheek. "The past holds nothing for me anymore. My future, our future, is all that matters now." As October arrived, bringing with it the vibrant colors of autumn, Hadley's time drew near. Luke expanded his precautions, rarely leaving the ranch and ensuring the wagon was always ready should they need to make a quick journey to town for the doctor. The bedroom intended for the baby was completed, a bright, cheerful space with a handcrafted crib Luke had worked on in secret during the summer months. Hadley had sewn tiny garments, blankets, and curtains for the windows. Together, they had created a haven for the child they both anticipated with growing excitement. One crisp morning, as they sat at breakfast, Hadley suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "Luke," she said, her voice tight with mingled fear and excitement, "I think it's time." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. Luke sent Thomas Jenkins racing to town for the doctor, while he helped Hadley to bed and boiled water as she had instructed him. Mrs. Wilson and several other women from town arrived ahead of the doctor, taking charge of the situation with practiced efficiency. Luke found himself relegated to the hallway, pacing anxiously as Hadley's labor progressed. Each cry from behind the closed bedroom door tore at his heart. "First babies often take their time," Dr. Miller assured him when he finally arrived. "Your wife is young and healthy. Try not to worry." Easier said than done. As afternoon turned to evening and Hadley's labor intensified, Luke's anxiety grew. He had faced stampedes, blizzards, and hostile strangers without flinching, but the thought of losing Hadley paralyzed him with fear. Just before midnight, a new sound pierced the air, the lusty cry of a newborn baby. Luke froze mid-pace, his heart hammering. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the bedroom door finally opened, and Mrs. Wilson emerged, her face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Patterson," she said warmly. "You have a healthy son, and your wife is doing just fine." The relief that flooded through Luke nearly brought him to his knees. "Can I see them?" "Of course. They're waiting for you." Luke entered the bedroom to find Hadley propped up against pillows, her face pale but radiant with joy. In her arms lay a tiny bundle wrapped in the soft blanket she had sewn weeks earlier. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Moving as if in a dream, Luke approached the bed and looked down at the small, red face of his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and, as Luke watched in wonder, opened his eyes to reveal a deep blue gaze that seemed impossibly aware. "He's perfect," Luke whispered, reaching out to touch the impossibly soft cheek. "Would you like to hold him?" Hadley asked. Tentatively, Luke gathered the tiny bundle into his arms, marveling at how light and yet how substantial he felt. This was his son not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the promise he had made to Hadley and to himself. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your pa." The baby blinked solemnly up at him, and Luke felt a rush of love so powerful it took his breath away. In that moment, any lingering doubts about his ability to be a father to another man's child vanished completely. This was his son, in every way that mattered. "What shall we call him?" Hadley asked, watching the two most important people in her life bond before her eyes. Luke considered for a moment. "What about William, after my father?" "William Patterson," Hadley said, trying the name. "It's strong, perfect for him." As Luke returned the baby to Hadley's arms, their eyes met over their son's head, a look of pure understanding, of shared joy, of profound love. "Thank you," Luke said softly, "for our son, for our family." "Thank you," Hadley replied, "for giving us both a home when we had nowhere else to turn." The doctor and women soon departed, leaving the new family alone to bond. Luke pulled a chair close to the bed, unwilling to be separated from Hadley and William even by a few feet. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, Hadley drifted to sleep, the baby nestled securely against her. Luke watched them both, overcome with gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them into his life. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the front door. Carefully, so as not to disturb his sleeping family, Luke went downstairs to answer it. To his astonishment, Deacon Daniels stood on the porch, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Hadley's mother waited anxiously. "We heard the news in town," Daniels said stiffly. "A boy." "Yes," Luke replied cautiously. "William Patterson, born just before midnight. Mother and child are both well." Mrs. Daniels stepped forward. "May we see them, please?" Luke hesitated. The man before him had cast Hadley out, had treated her with unforgivable cruelty. Yet he was also William's grandfather and Hadley's father. "Hadley is resting now," he said finally. "But you're welcome to come back this afternoon. Whether she wishes to see you will be entirely her decision." Deacon Daniels nodded, an uncharacteristic humility in his bearing. "That's fair, more than fair, considering you sold her to the highest bidder." Luke couldn't help the edge that crept into his voice. "Yes." The simple acknowledgement surprised Luke. "I was wrong, blinded by pride and fear of scandal. It's not me you need to say that to," Luke pointed out. "I know." Daniels glanced toward the upstairs window. "We'll return this afternoon if that's acceptable." After they departed, Luke returned upstairs to find Hadley awake, nursing William. "Who was at the door?" she asked. Luke hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "Your parents. They heard about William and wanted to see you both." Hadley's hands trembled slightly. "What did you tell them?" "That they could come back this afternoon, but that it would be entirely your decision whether to receive them." He sat beside her on the bed. "You don't have to see them if you don't want to." Hadley was quiet for a long moment, looking down at their son's peaceful face. "What did my father say exactly?" He admitted he was wrong. "Said he was blinded by pride and fear of scandal." Luke took her free hand. "He seemed genuinely humbled, but that doesn't erase what he did." "No, it doesn't," Hadley agreed softly. After another long pause, she added, "But William deserves to know his grandparents if they're willing to be part of his life in a positive way." Luke smiled, once again impressed by her capacity for forgiveness. "You're a better person than I am." "No," Hadley replied, squeezing his hand. "Just different. Your protectiveness is one of the things I love most about you." That afternoon, when Deacon and Mrs. Daniels returned, they were welcomed into the Patterson home with cautious civility. The meeting was awkward at first, weighted with months of pain and separation. Mrs. Daniels burst into tears at the sight of her grandson, reaching for him with trembling hands. "He's beautiful, Hadley. So perfect." "Would you like to hold him, Mother?" Hadley asked, her voice carefully neutral. The simple act of placing William in his grandmother's arms seemed to break through some invisible barrier. As Mrs. Daniels cooed and marveled over the baby, Deacon Daniels approached his daughter's bedside. "I was wrong," he said simply. "My pride cost me my daughter and nearly my grandson." "I'm sorry, Hadley, truly sorry." Hadley studied her father's face, searching for signs of the unyielding judgment that had dominated her childhood. Instead, she saw genuine regret, perhaps even the beginnings of understanding. "It will take time," she said finally. "Trust, once broken, isn't easily mended." "I understand," Daniels nodded. "We'll take whatever you're willing to give." Luke, watching from across the room, felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to protect Hadley from any further hurt her family might cause. Yet he also recognized the importance of this reconciliation not for the Daniels, but for Hadley and William. "Perhaps you could come for Sunday dinner next week," he found himself suggesting. "If Hadley feels strong enough by then." The invitation, unexpected by all, marked the beginning of a careful rebuilding. Not a return to what had been that was impossible, but the creation of something new, something that acknowledged past wrongs while allowing for the possibility of future healing. As autumn deepened toward winter, the Patterson ranch settled into a new rhythm centered around William's needs. Hadley recovered quickly from the birth, her natural strength returning day by day. Luke proved to be a devoted father, as comfortable cradling William in his strong arms as he was tending to the cattle or mending fences. Sunday dinners with the Daniels became a cautious tradition. While Hadley never fully trusted her father again, she allowed him and her mother to be part of William's life, watching carefully for any sign of the judgment that had once wounded her so deeply. To her surprise, Deacon Daniels seemed genuinely transformed by his role as grandfather. The rigid morality that had dominated his relationship with Hadley softened when applied to William. Perhaps, Hadley reflected, it was easier to love without conditions when that love came without the weight of parental responsibility. As William's first Christmas approached, Luke surprised Hadley with a trip to Boys to purchase special gifts for their son. The journey marked their first significant separation since their marriage. "Are you sure you'll be all right?" Luke asked, reluctant to leave despite the importance of the trip. "We'll be fine," Hadley assured him, William contentedly nursing at her breast. "Mrs. Wilson has promised to check on us, and Thomas will stay in the bunkhouse while you're gone." Still, the 3 days of Luke's absence felt interminable to Hadley. She found herself watching the road for his return, counting the hours until her family would be complete again. When Luke finally appeared, his wagon loaded with packages and supplies, Hadley ran to meet him, William bundled securely against the December chill. "I missed you," she said simply, as Luke gathered them both into his embrace. "I missed you more," he replied, kissing her thoroughly before turning his attention to William. "And you, little man, have you been taking care of your ma while I was gone?" the baby gurgled happily, reaching for Luke's beard with tiny, grasping fingers. The simple homecoming seeing a husband returning to his wife and child was made profound by the knowledge of how close they had come to never having this life at all. That night, after William was settled in his crib, Luke surprised Hadley with a special gift of her own, a delicate gold locket containing miniature portraits of both Luke and William. "So we'll always be close to your heart," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "You already are," Hadley replied, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Always and forever." As they prepared for bed, Hadley found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment, from despair to joy, from abandonment to love, from shame to pride. "What are you thinking about?" Luke asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Just how strange life can be," she replied, moving into his embrace. "A year ago I thought my life was over. Now I can't imagine being happier." Luke kissed her tenderly. "Do you ever regret it?" "That it was necessity that brought us together, not choice." Hadley considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally, "because it may have been necessity that brought us together, but it's love that keeps us that way, and that was a choice, one we made together." As snow began to fall outside their window, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, Luke and Hadley Patterson held each other close, secure in the knowledge that the family they had created, born of compassion, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by love, was more precious than any conventional beginning could have provided. In the years that followed, the Patterson ranch flourished. Luke's careful management and hard work expanded their holdings, while Hadley's warm presence transformed the simple farmhouse into a true home. William grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy, with his mother's gentle spirit and his father's determined nature. 2 years after William's birth, Hadley gave birth to twin girls Sarah and Elizabeth Patterson, completing their family with joyous chaos. Luke proved as devoted a father to his daughters as he was to William, seeing no distinction between the child of his heart and the children of his blood. The scandal that had once threatened to define Hadley's life faded into distant memory. In its place grew a deep respect from the community for the Patterson family's integrity, generosity, and unwavering commitment to one another. Occasionally, Hadley would catch Luke watching William with their younger children, teaching William to ride while the twins toddled after them, or showing him how to mend a fence while the girls collected wildflowers nearby. In those moments, she would remember the words that had changed her life on that desperate day in Challies. "That innocent child needs real love." Those words, spoken by a stranger who became her salvation, had proven prophetic. William had indeed found real love, as had Hadley herself, in the arms of a man whose compassion had redeemed them both. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the summer twilight, Hadley leaned her head against Luke's shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Luke asked, his arm tightening around her. "For seeing value in us when no one else did. For creating this life I never dared to dream of." Luke turned to her, the love of a decade reflected in his eyes. "You and the children are the greatest blessing I've ever known. Sometimes I think I should be thanking your father for his cruelty. Without it, you might never have become mine." Hadley smiled, understanding the paradox he described. From the darkest moment of her life had come its greatest joy, a truth she had long since reconciled. "We found each other when we needed each other most," she said simply. "And we built something beautiful from the broken pieces." As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Patterson family gathered on their porch, a living testament to the power of compassion, the strength of forgiveness, and the enduring triumph of love over judgment. In a small town in Idaho, where a desperate young woman had once been sold to the highest bidder, a family bound not by blood but by choice had found its forever home. And in that home, the innocent child who had needed real love had found it in abundance, as had the mother who had carried him, and the father who had chosen them both.